Okay, hello everyone. So I would like to welcome you to the fourth webinar for the GlobeDrought series. And before starting officially, I would like to make sure that everyone can hear me. So if you can hear me, please write yes in the text chat. Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you again for joining our webinar, and I would like also to thank our hosts for today's webinar, Drought Impact on Gender and Women, Dr. Diksha Arora from CGIAR in Colombia, and Mr. Ahmed Abdinasir from Save Somali Women and Children. And we will have this webinar for 1 hour. The first half of the webinar will be for 2 presentations from our experts, followed by questions and answers. So I would hand over now to Dr. Diksha to share with us her presentation. So Diksha, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Zainab. Okay.
Yeah, your presentation will be on the screen within seconds.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'll be sharing some of my work that I've been doing in Colombia in one of the departments or state equivalent here, which is very prone to droughts and dry seasons. And in the last few years, especially with the El Nino effect, the effect of these dry seasons have been prolonged and much more severe. It was so severe that in 2015 and 2016, this one specific municipality, which is a livestock intensive region, suffered a very severe drought that there was no rain for almost 2 years, because then I went to this place for the first time in November of 2016, and that was the first time it rained in 2 years, and people were really celebrating. So in the following year, in 2017, I conducted a study, a household survey, and also focused on the impact of this drought to understand how people cope with this impact, and also of the climate-induced events, and how they are differentiated between men and women. So understanding the gender dynamics of these events. So the title of my presentation is Drought and its Impacts on Assets, Livelihoods, and Gender Roles. Just to start with a bit of a background, droughts can have an effect on a community in many ways. These effects could be economic, it could be failure or loss of crops, assets. They could be environmental effects, which include changes in biodiversity or erosion of water resources. And there are also social effects that I will talk specifically in this paper, and also there's some literature, qualitative literature, that has talked about changes in the social dynamics of communities, changes in power balances between certain groups, and also, of course, the gender effects, the dynamics between men and women in the household as well as in the communities. The vulnerability to drought is driven by socioeconomic as well as biophysical factors. So there are different socioeconomic factors, including income, gender, social growth, and the biophysical factors, the geographical location of one's household, that determine an individual's susceptibility and their ability to cope with such events. So whether you belong to a preferred or a more socially acceptable group, and if you have more income, that will determine how susceptible you are to a drought or any other climate change induced event, and your ability to cope with such events. So in regard to this, I believe that, in my opinion, social dimension is very important in determining one's vulnerability to these external shocks. For women specifically, because of gender dynamics and the inbuilt gender institutions in the household, in the community, in the market, women are more vulnerable to the factors related to their reproductive roles in specific women's roles in the households, care work, unpaid care provision, and unpaid work in the households, basically management and the household chores. And of course, also the social norms that regulate the decision-making power and access to resources of the women. The rationale for doing this study is mainly because there is very few studies that have looked at the impact of these extreme climate change-induced events, particularly drought, on time use or labor allocation. So previous studies have looked at, there are a lot of studies that look at the impact of climate change-induced events and climate change in general, or global warming, looking at the impact of these on agricultural income, agricultural productivity, and also the well-being of smallholder households in different parts of the developing world. And climate change-induced events, not only so a drought or a flood, not only affects people's incomes and their assets, but it also impacts their ability to work and their decisions on labor allocation, how much they want to work on the farm, how much they want to stay in the house, how much they want to dedicate to leisure. All these decisions of people are also affected by what kind of day it is. Is it a really hot day? Do they want to spend 4 hours on the farm? So all these decisions are not made in isolation, and climate change or droughts definitely have an impact on these decisions. Just a couple of previous studies have analyzed the impact of global warming, so increases in global temperatures, on individuals' distribution of work and leisure time. Both of these studies were macro studies conducted in the context of the developed world, and so they still do not look at the impact of households particularly, and they do not look at rural and urban distribution. So something that's still missing is how agricultural, specifically smallholder households, are managing their time when they're faced with such events. The objective of this study, I will explore the impact of droughts on labor allocation, particularly time use of small-scale livestock producers, through a case study of livestock herders in Patia, which is a municipality in a very livestock-intensive region in the department of Cauca in Colombia. The study focuses on documenting the gender-differentiated impacts of a drought, of an extreme drought during the period of 2015 and 16 in this region. My data has, the data collection is primary household data that was collected in 2017 by myself and a research assistant. We have data from 97 livestock rearing households, households with mainly couples, so the man and the woman both live together, across 24 villages in this region. The data consists of household level production and consumption, intra-household level decision making, and time use. And then I also have some semi-structured interviews on the impact of this drought during the previous 2 years on individuals' roles and responsibilities. So again, by the time the data collection was done, the drought was over. So these interviews on the impact of drought is done in retrospect. So it's using the recall method, and of course it is subject to certain recall biases. Description of my sample population. Majority of the people in this region depend on agriculture, particularly livestock, as their principal livelihood. After livestock, food production is also an important source of income and food security. Most of, I think this is the third point is an interesting demographic dynamic here, that most of the households that own livestock and land, which were the primary participants in this survey, are composed of older adults whose children have already migrated to nearby cities. So the household size is a little over 2, which was really interesting to me in the beginning. But then when I started talking to the community members more, I understood that these livestock holders are relatively better off in terms of assets and income. So they manage to educate their children and are able to send them to study in colleges or get professional jobs in nearby cities of Cali and Popayán. So most of the people who are left behind are the parents who are managing the farms, and they also receive some kind of assistance from their children. In terms of the gender dynamic of the household, we find there are stark differences in the principal activities. So the principal occupation, men always said that livestock rearing is their principal activity, while women reported care work, that being in the house, being a homemaker is their principal occupation. Oftentimes women, because of the perceptions and that they are not farmers, they tend to report that they are homemakers. So I also try to collect data on their secondary activities. So what do they do if they consider themselves as homemakers besides tending to the house? What else do they do? In that question, I found about 43% of the women reported that livestock rearing is their secondary activity, or they tend to help their husbands with these activities. In this graph, I report the time used or the distribution of activities of men and women in this region. The darker bars are representing the men, and lighter ones are representing the women. So you see that there is, again, in livestock, the division is very clear that most of the men are working more or close to 5 hours a day in livestock activities. Well, women still spend close to an hour and a half in livestock. So to say that they are not livestock farmers is an underestimation of their contribution. And that is why time use surveys are really important to understand what men and women do on a day-to-day basis. Household and the third part here, sorry, let me use the cursor. Yeah. So, okay, the third one for household and care responsibilities, you see that there is, again, a huge difference. Women are entirely responsible for household care provision, while men are contributing very, very little. These pattern of labor allocation are also observed in other regions of Colombia and also in other countries in Latin America, whereby men are primarily responsible for agricultural activities, the public sphere, and women are primary caretakers of the household work, so the private sphere. Now I'll talk a little bit about the impact of the climate change induced events. So as I mentioned earlier, these households experienced a severe drought for almost 2 years during 2015 and 16. The drought caused obviously certain damages, certain losses to these farmers, and they reported the damages in 3 major categories: whether they only lost their livestock, whether they lost only crops and the pasture cover, or they lost both the livestock animals as well as the crops and pasture cover. So you see that majority of the population, about close to 58.76% of the sample households, reported losing both animals as well as their crops and pasture cover. So to think of it, this is their primary or the principal source of livelihood, and to lose part of their assets that generate their livelihood is also a threat to their food security. And then I asked them about how did they manage and cope with the impact of this drought while the drought was still ongoing. So many people took different measures. The measures that I'm reporting here in this slide are mainly the monetary measures. So some of them sold their livestock, which is a very small percentage, only less than 5%. About a quarter took loans in order to be able to meet the needs of the livestock activities, in order to feed the cattle or feed other livestock, and also take care of household expenses. While about 50% of the households use their savings. So as I mentioned earlier, these households are already relatively better off. They have bank accounts, so some of them also had savings, and they were able to use their savings to meet the demands of the agricultural as well as household sector during this period. And about 20% of the households did not take any monetary measures. In this table, I talk about other actions that are not monetary. So the actions that these people took in order to cope with the impact of this drought, which did not necessarily meant, which could involve using their incomes, while others do not involve using income, so they use their time, which is of course an important input in generation of income. So you'd see some of them bought water pumps, others used concentrates or bought food for the cattle. They also took their cattle to other farms or rented land with better pasture in order to feed the cattle. They were collecting tree leaves or certain trees, the leaves of such can be used for feeding the cattle. And then about 10% of the households also hired the labor to help them with these actions or these activities. Underneath the table, I mentioned a couple of anecdotal evidence from the men who are not only mentioning that they took these actions, they talk about how these actions impacted their stress levels, their time use, and labor work burden. So one of them says, I work double as hard as normally in order to collect water for the cattle and inspect their health, since they were more vulnerable due to lack of sufficient food and water. Another one says, I took my cattle to the creek where the water was still flowing during the drought. I walked 1 hour each side with the cattle in extreme heat under the sun. So despite their regular work burden that they had in the livestock and the farm sector, during the drought they had to spend extra time in order to ensure that their livestock is functioning and they're able to produce the output from the livestock sector. Well, men did face some difficult choices between this additional work that was generated due to the impact of the drought, but they did not have competing claims on their time from other household responsibilities. As we saw in the graph earlier, men are pretty much not doing anything with the household work or care provision. So the primary responsibility they have is in the sphere outside the house, which is the livestock sector or the farm sector. So how did this impact the women who have the double burden of outside the household work and inside the household work? Here we see the women, they always say help because they want to acknowledge the fact that they're helping their husbands. They help in several of these actions that were taken by men, and women participated in those, so helping with transferring the water from a creek or from the house or from other sources of water around the farms or other even sometimes areas farther away from the farm to the farm in order to feed the cattle and also maintain some of the crops. They helped with digging the reservoirs. They prepared and transported food for the hired labor. They also took the cattle to other farms. They helped with collecting tree leaves for cattle feed, and they helped with feeding the animals and also the purchase of feed for the animals. You see that these are more or less the similar activities that or the actions that were undertaken by men during the period of drought. So most of the women did the same things while helping their husbands in the livestock sector. How did that impact women's time, work burden and time use? So these activities that were undertaken by women in the livestock sector during the drought certainly burdened them with additional work, as is evident from some of the anecdotal evidence that I provide. And I have most of these anecdotal evidence for all the 97 households that participated in the survey. I just try to categorize them in broader categories based on their actions and report only some of the anecdotes in order for the sake of time. I had to give up some of the household chores in the morning in order to transport water in buckets for the cattle. The household work used to get accumulated that I had to take care of during the evening. I worked at least 3 hours more per day to complete all the tasks. Another woman says, in order to help my husband with transporting water from the creek to the water tank from the farm, we often left early in the morning and worked till late without food. Later, I would come back to the house to manage household chores like cleaning, looking after the garden, and cook food and take the food to the farm for my husband. Lastly, often I would gather mangoes and leaves from calabash trees to feed the cattle. Collecting these would take me more than 2 hours every day. The drought was a very difficult period for us. We worked more than normal only to survive. So you'd see like women also saw an increase in their time allocation to the livestock sector. So did the men. However, women were already working a lot more compared to men. And they were not only faced with more work and less leisure time, they were faced with these difficult decisions to manage their time in the household and outside the household. So it's something that is often not captured by time use is the stress of making these decisions. How do I allocate my time in cooking and still be able to help my husband with some of the livestock activities? These were the things that actually came out during these semi-structured interviews when women are able to talk and share their experiences. So just to conclude, there is definitely greater uncertainty surrounding rainfall, and more frequent droughts are already affecting smallholders' ability to earn a livelihood. These events are bound to get worse with changing climate and increasing temperatures. So considering the impact of droughts not only on livelihoods and assets, but also on labor allocation and time use, which is an input in construction or input in generation of incomes and assets. The results of this study show that the actions that were undertaken to cope with the impact of the drought were definitely very labor intensive and increased the demand for labor in the livestock related activities, both for men and women. For women specifically, these additional demands on their time meant competing claims for which they had to make trade-offs between their household and livestock-related activities. So definitely there are gender-differentiated impacts of climate change-induced events, climate change, which are often not captured by just looking at the data or looking at studies that are at the household level or are only focusing on men or only focusing on monetary measures like assets and incomes. And for this reason, I believe that it's very important to focus on labor allocation and time use, whereby we can capture how these gender dynamics are playing as a result of these climate change-induced events.
Thank you so much, Diksha, for the very informative presentation. And now I will hand over to Ahmed. So Ahmed, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Okay, so your presentation is going to be on the screen within a second. Okay, and the microphone is yours, Ahmed. Please go.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I think mine will be very straightforward. I will not take more than the 15 minutes that I have been given. I'm going to discuss about the drought impacts on gender, women or specifically and girls. To start with, maybe in the Somali context, there is a very devastating drought that happened in the year 2011, 2010, I think, with a second one in 2017, and the latest 2018, which was not as bad as the previous one. However, in my presentation, I think I will limit myself to the impact on women and girls, and specifically the coping mechanisms, the key coping mechanisms that can be exploited. When we talk of drought, definitely there are a lot of things that come into many people's mind, but discrimination is a very key element that I pointed out. And when we talk of drought, women and girls are hit most in terms of economical, social, environmentally, and all other aspects in life, particularly in our developing countries. I talked of drought contributing to the decrease in livestock counts and can also deplete pasture. And therefore, I said women are left to till the field as means of looking for food instead of the normal livestock rearing that could happen in some societies. And this makes difficult, especially women and girls, as they are also left to do most of the domestic work at home in many developing countries. It also leads to decrease in food supply and stock, especially in the household, and this forces women to seek other means, and most of the time it exposes them to dangers, risks such as prostitution and many other ill activities. I also talked about drought, where it reinforces the sexual division of labor, and this leaves the population malnourished, hungry, and with reduced physical ability. But despite all this, it makes women and girls to also fetch water, firewood, wash dishes, with a little energy that is left with them. Therefore, this is directly affecting women and girls compared to their male and other community members. Drought also leads to drying or reducing the water tables, and it forces women also to fetch water from very far remote areas, and especially they do this for their family because they also take care of the children. And also the livestock at times. And this, because of these long distances, there are a lot of risks that it involves. It exposes women to abduction, rape, and many other dangers, or even eaten by wild animals. We also know that women and girls are responsible for the household chores, and household chores includes maybe fetching firewood for cooking. And when drought hits the community, it affects the growing of trees. It depletes the trees, and this makes women also again to look for firewood moving from one place to another, especially long distances, which still exposes them to many other risks. There's also the issue of rural-urban migration. This, similarly to the previous issue that I talked about, it leads to movement of the women and girls from the villages or the rural areas to the cities. And once they are moving to the cities, there is this exposure to the GBV risks, and also when they reach at the cities, they also get exposed to other risks such as prostitution, crime, and many other city life challenges which they are not used to. Also, we can talk of conflict. When drought hits a society or a community, conflict arises, whether it is household level or at community level. And when it's at community level, two clans or two tribes will start fight for resources because the resources are scarce, whether it is water points, whether it's grazing land, and this and when the conflict starts, I think women and girls are the most hit because of their vulnerability. because of how vulnerable they are within the context that they will operate, because they are not fighting, they are not holding guns, they are not there to defend themselves, so they become the most vulnerable in the society. And this also, some militia groups may take advantage, especially when they want to take advantage of such lawless environment, which issues of protection again comes up. Then at household level, you'll find maybe when resources are scarce, there is a lot of conflict between a wife and a husband, or at maybe father to son, mother to daughter to mother. There are a lot of conflicts because nobody can provide the other the resources required to live, and this makes separation of families, division of families, and it affects the women and girls most, because once they are left alone, it's a challenge for them. I also like to talk about the early and forced marriages that is regularly very common when there are not only drought but other natural disasters in a society. And since parents in most third world countries use the young girls or the women as the source of income for their existence or for their survival, they do make young girls get married to old men, or even marry young ladies or women to men that they are not of their choice. And this has a psychological impact on women and girls, especially when they get traumatized, helpless, and even sometimes commit suicide. I would like to also talk about the menstrual hygiene, which when there is drought, there is shortage of water, hygiene becomes an issue, and when women and girls also have menstrual cycle, it's a challenge to them in a big way. And this also, limits the movement of these women and girls from one place to another, since without cleaning themselves, it's not easy for them to move around. And health-wise, it's not also a good thing, it's very dangerous. Maybe also to talk about the coping mechanisms. The coping mechanisms, we have a lot of coping mechanisms, and it differs from context to context. But from the three aspects that I looked at, socially, economically, and environmentally, one of the coping mechanisms is maybe women and girls need to be involved in the community decision making. At least there should be some sense of independence. Women should at least have a say in their lives, and particularly in the resources around them. We talk of maybe water. Most of the time in our communities, you'll find water is managed by men, but at the same time, it impacts highly on women than men when there is shortage, or when it's not within our vicinities. So I will maybe urge women to be more involved in resource management, especially water and other resources that are within the community, whether it's farming, livestock, or others. This makes women make decisions and at least have a say in the coming droughts. I also talked about economic empowerment, maybe, or livelihood diversification, where women can at least not only depend on livestock and farming, but on other aspects of life, or other sectors, such as maybe engaging in small-scale businesses, maybe having 7 women groups within the community, and this makes the drought not hit them hard during the severe drought. I'll also maybe urge women to be given opportunities to school. Education, I'm sure, is not something that we will absolutely not, disagree with, if at all women and girls are given. And not only it gives them a source of livelihood, but also a way of making them manage their resources properly, whether it's the farming, whether it's livestock, or even other businesses. We also need to have the early warning systems to be in place, and women to be engaged in this, whether it's at community or government-led. Women should be able to identify the specific needs that concerns their day-to-day life, and also point out the key aspects that will going to affect their lives during the drought. I also like to talk about maybe sales of assets. Yes, sometimes you'll find that drought, when it hits a community, all the livestock will be finished, and we can tell sometimes through this early warning system. We can tell that the drought is going to come, and it will going to affect the lives of these individuals in a very serious way. So therefore, maybe it's an option if you sell all your livestock and restock after the drought, or use that money for other alternative sources, of livelihood. That will be fair, and it has proved in very many situations the community generally, and women and girls in particular. Also, during the harvesting season, especially for farmers, we find we have sometimes excess harvests that are getting wasted, and if this could be stored in a silo or in a protective manner, this will help the community use during the dry season. We have enough during the wet season, but it does not help if it is misused at all. So I think with that, I'll stop it there, and maybe look forward to the questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Ahmed, for your presentation. And now I think we have around 20 minutes for questions and answers. And there are from our participants, and there are 2 ways to share your question. Either you write it simply in the text chat, or if you would like to talk, and I will give you the microphone, but just please raise your hand. So in the upper toolbar, you can see this sign for raising the hand. So please raise your hand, and I will hand the microphone to you. And the other way is to write your question in the text chat, and then we will share it with our hosts. I think we are about to receive a question from Mahta. He's typing something. Yes, so the question from Mahta, can any of the speakers give an overview of how drought impacts gender roles in urban areas? So In this case, I will leave the microphone for Ahmed and Diksha to answer this question.
Okay, I can try. Hello, thanks a lot for the question. I'm primarily an investigator or a researcher in rural areas, and most of my work has focused on rural areas. But based on my knowledge of the literature, I can say definitely there are impacts. It depends on the context. So, for example, peri-urban areas that are something in between urban areas and rural areas where there's still some sort of agricultural production going on, and people are more involved in secondary occupations like working for a wage or in factories, etc. There is still a lot of problems with infrastructure, so similar problems of what Ahmed shared in his presentation about collecting water. There may not be problems related to firewood, but there's still problems related to water, which are definitely exacerbated during the droughts. So I believe that there are definitely impacts of droughts on gender roles in these areas as well. But it again has to be seen in different contexts and what kind of urban areas it is. Is it like a peri-urban area, or is it a fully developed urban areas where people are living in apartment buildings? And again, for example, recently there was a lot of problems with water in Cape Town in South Africa. So the lower income people in the urban areas were still spending a lot, especially women were spending a lot of time. Women and children were spending enormous amount of time standing in queues to collect water. So I won't say that was particularly because of drought, but there were the water pretty much was almost going to dry up in the whole area of Cape Town in South Africa. So I guess just looking around in the literature, there has to be some event, but because most of my work has focused on rural areas, I cannot give you specific examples from my own study. Thank you.
So thank you, Diksha. So Ahmed, if you have any addition to this question?
Thank you, Zainab. To add on what Arora said, traditionally in our communities, it is men who provide the basic services, especially at urban areas or in urban areas. But when drought affects and everybody moves from the rural areas to the urban areas, it happens that sometimes women take the role of providing for the family. And you will find a lot of women doing a lot of sales of different products, whether it is agricultural outputs or sometimes even what we call mira in our context. And you will find literally men will just be idle, and it's women who will take responsibility. It's not only drought, but even conflict zones where there is no formal work to be done, or there are some jobs that men are afraid of to do, but women still will have to take responsibility and even provide their husbands. And this impacts on the gender roles in the in urban areas.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed, for the answer. So another round of questions. If any one of the participants have a question, please raise your hand using the icon in the upper toolbar, or just write your question in the text chat. Okay, so Ramesh has a question. So Ramesh, now you can speak. The microphone is yours. Please go ahead. So Ramesh, if you hear me, the microphone is yours now. You are capable of speaking and share your question with us. Okay, Ram.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Ramesh. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. As Ahmed mentioned, that one of the coping mechanism is to have a monitoring system of drought events. So I just wanted to ask Ahmed, does anything like that already is existing in his study? Or and what exactly he sees the role of woman or girl in this kind of monitoring system?
Thank you very much, Ramesh. Yes, when I talked of coping mechanisms, especially on monitoring and early warning systems, many a times you'll find these systems are in place, but women are non-involved. And it happens that it's only men, whether it's government-led or the community-led, women are not involved at all. And if you give the women and girls the opportunity to maybe involve in these early warning systems and what to do, they will have given another picture of what men are going to maybe do or plan to foresee. So that's why I talked about it helps a lot when women are given such opportunities. If they are involved in the monitoring and early warning system, yes, they will identify the key areas that will affect their lives. Yes, what do we do since the drought is coming? What do we do about water? What do we do about the livestock that gives us if they are pastoralists? What do we do about the farming that they engage in if they are farmers? So that is the angle I was looking at from, especially giving women the opportunity to participate in this decision-making process, so that when the drought hits the community, they know where exactly will reduce their level of work, where it will going to impact them less than the blanket men decision, which usually happens at many times.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I think there might be a question coming up from Mahtab again in the text chat. So the question is, patriarchal structures will prevent that participation. Is it not so?
Okay, I can try to answer that. So definitely, you know, the gendered institutions and the structures, they already prevent women from participating, whether it's early warning systems or receiving climate services. So with the CCAP, the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Program of CGIAR, we work a lot in Latin America, especially in Central America, which is home to the dry corridor, and there are severe droughts there in the last few years. One of the objective is to work specifically with women, to bring them the information, bring them climate services, bring them these kind of early warning systems. So how we do that, we work, there are mesas técnicas, is like technical local level committees or something like that, which work with the CGIAR, so our teams, and also with the meteorological services of the country. And these local level committees, they work with women's organizations to identify and be able to work with women farmers. So, I mean, this project is still in it's still ongoing, and we are trying to expand this to upscale this initiative, because it's very important for women to receive these services and this information, and often they do not get this information. So as you said, there is definitely the gender discrimination prevents women from accessing these services. However, as Ahmed said, the idea is to go beyond these institutions and specifically target women in order to disseminate and provide them with this information. Thank you.
So Ahmed, do you have any inputs regarding this question? Okay, so if not, and if there is no more questions, so we will come to an end of this webinar. Yes, Ahmed, please, if you have any inputs, please go ahead.
Yes, I think Arora has answered that question. But however, yes, this in the particular structures, this participation is not always welcome. But however, we are talking of the ideal situation and what can make these women cope through this drought. And there are societies who do that, or women get the opportunity and the success is witnessed. But those who don't, the challenge is still there. Although from my presentation, we are looking at the angle of women and girls. So definitely, even at a broader level, consultation is key for every group in the society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I'm not sure if Mahtab would like to speak, but Mahtab, if you have any further comments or questions, so now the microphone is yours and you can speak. Okay, and I would like to go like
I just want to thank.
Okay, go ahead, Mahtab, please. Yeah.
I just wish to thank the speaker. I learned a lot. It was very informative. Especially the study. So it's very much a matter of scale. So the first study was very informative about how these dynamics work at a small scale. As I said, I'm from Iran, and we will be definitely experiencing very long drought. For now, we are facing a very huge flood at home. Almost half of the country is flooded now. But then in the long term, we will be facing long droughts there. So that's why I was asking you in urban area, because the definitely dynamics in very concentrated and highly developed urban areas, very dense ones, will be different from agriculture areas. But however, thanks for the replies. I wish everyone well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahtab. And as you said, drought is not only in Tehran, it's everywhere in the world. And that's why I urge all of you to continue in these, participating in these monthly webinars for the GlobeDrought projects. And Ahmed mentioned something about monitoring. And this is going to be developed on the long run throughout this project. just last question, if anyone has any more questions, please go ahead, ask for the microphone or write it in the chat. So otherwise, we are going to close this webinar. Again, a round of applause for our hosts, Diksha and Ahmed, for the very informative presentations and also for the very fruitful discussions we had with our participants. And see you soon by the end of next month for the next GlobeDrought webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you, Zainab.